Good morning, Franklin friends. It's nice to see you again. This is Miss Kennedy here. We're going to read another chapter of The Cricket in Times Square. So we're on chapter 9. We left off when the money that Tucker gave to Chester was in the pagoda. And now we're going to find out what happens next. We're on chapter 9. It's called The Chinese Dinner. Mario decided that there must be something wrong with Chester's diet if he was eating $2 bills. He had been feeding him all the things he liked himself, but now it occurred to him that what was good for a boy might not be right for a cricket. So he made up his mind to take the matter to an expert. Late one afternoon, when he got off duty at the newsstand, Mario cleaned up the cricket cage, gave Chester a dusting off with the Kleenex, and took him to Chinatown to see Mr. Fong. It was almost 7 o'clock when he got there, and the shop was closed. He peered through the window and could make out a crack of light under the door of the inner room. He heard the sounds of two voices talking together in Chinese. Mario rapped on the glass. The voices stopped talking. He rapped again, louder. The inside door opened and Mr. Fong came into the shop, squinting through the half light. When he saw Mario, his chin dropped and he said, "Oh, the little boy with a cricket." He opened the door. "Hello, Mr. Fong," said Mario. "I don't want to bother you, but I have a problem with my cricket." Please come in," said Mr. Fong, closing the door behind them. "My very old friend is here, and he knows everything about crickets." He led Mario into the next room, which was a kitchen, and on the black cast iron stove there were half-dozen pots steaming and singing. The table was laid with beautiful painted china plates, and on them were pictures of Chinese ladies and gentlemen dressed in colorful gowns and robes, walking on little bridges over calm blue lakes. Beside the places that had been set were two pairs of chopsticks, each one of its own in paper. A very old Chinese gentleman was sitting in a rocking chair next to the window. He had a thin gray beard that hung down from his chin, and he was wearing a long red and gold robe that looked like the ones on the plates. When Mario came in, he stood up slowly with his hands folded and bowed. Mario had never had an old Chinese gentleman bow to him before, and he didn't quite know what to do, but he thought he had better bow back. Then the Chinese gentleman bowed again, and so did Mario. They might have gone on bowing all night if Sai Fong hadn't said something in Chinese to his friend. It probably meant, "This is the boy with the cricket." Mario and Chester stole a glance at each other, but neither one of them understood Chinese. The old man, however, became very excited. He peered down through the bars of the cricket cage and examined them with delight. Then, drawing himself up to his full height, he made a very low and solemn bow. Chester bowed back and gave him one of his most beautiful and polite chirps. This pleased the Chinese gentleman very much. He and Sai Fang began laughing and talking together. When they were finished telling each other how fine a cricket Chester was, Sai Fang said to Mario, "Do you like Chinese food?" "Yes, I do," answered Mario. "Well, I guess. I'd never had anything Chinese except chop suey, but he was awfully fond of that." "Would you like some?" said Sai Fong. He disappeared into the shop and came back in a minute with two tiny little robes. "This one's for you," he said, helping Mario on with one. It was purple and lavender and had designs of the sun, moon, and stars stitched all over it. "And this is mine," said Mr. Fong, putting on his own robe, which was blue and green, covered with pictures of fish, reeds, and water lilies. The old Chinese gentleman whispered something to his friend, and Sai Fong whispered an answer back in Chinese. "So sorry," he said to Mario. "There is no robe small enough for the cricket." "Oh, that's all right," said Mario. "You sit, please," said Sai, and brought another chair to the table. Mario sat down, and the Chinese gentleman sat opposite him. Fong put the cricket cage in the middle of the table and then went back and forth to the stove, bringing over steaming bowls of Chinese food. Chester was very curious to see what it tasted like, since he'd never even had chop suey. This is chow yuk, Chinese vegetable, said Fong, setting it down the first bowl. There were all kinds of green vegetables in the chow yuk, string beans, pea pods, and also pieces of dry diced chicken. Next came fried rice with pork, cooked delicious in a delicious brown sauce with a nutty flavor. Then chow mein with pan-fried noodles and cashew nuts. But it wasn't all soupy like the chow mein that Mario had seen at the automat. He could have made a meal just out of the pan-fried noodles alone. And the last there was duck cooked with pineapples. The pieces of roasted duck were swimming in a luscious sweet sauce. Finally, Fong brought over a big pot of something. You know what this is? He asked as he lifted the lid. Mario looked in. Tea? He said. Ha 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 ha, laughed Fong. You make a very good person, he said as he smiled broadly. Mario had a hard time learning to use the chopsticks. They kept slipping out of his hand. Make believe you have two very long fingers, said Mr. Fong. Two long fingers, two long fingers. Mario kept saying this to himself over and over again, and then he could work them. He got so that he could almost feel the food at the end of them as he lifted them to his mouth. Chester was served his dinner too. Mr. Fong got a tiny saucer out of the cupboard and put a dab of each course on it for the cricket, and he had never tasted anything so good. He especially liked the chow yuk because vegetables were his favorite. Ever so often he would have to stop eating and chirp for joy. Whenever he did, the Chinese gentleman and Mr. Fong smiled and chatted to each other in Chinese. Mario felt the same way Chester did, but he couldn't chirp. All he could do to show how much he was enjoying everything was to say, "Yes, please," each time Mr. Fong asked him if he wanted more. When the four of them had eaten as much of the chow yuk and chow mein and pork fried rice and duck with pineapples as they wanted, Fong brought out some candy kumquats for dessert. Mario had two and several cups of tea. Chester was so full he could only nibble on a piece of one. Now, said Mr. Fong, when they were all finished, what is the problem with the cricket? He lit his white clay pipe, and the old Chinese gentleman lit one too. They sat smoking with the wisps of smoke curling around their chins, looking very wise, Mario thought. Well, the problem is, Mario began, that my cricket eats money, and he told them all about the $2 bill. Fong had to translate everything into Chinese for his friend. After each new sentence, the old man would nod his head and say, "Oh," or "Ah," or in a serious voice. So I think he must not be getting the right things to eat, Mario continued his story. Very excellent deduction, said Fong as he began talking rapidly in Chinese. Then he stood up and said, "You wait, please," and went into the shop. In a moment he was back carrying a big book under his arm. As the two Chinese gentlemen were reading it, they would stop now and then and mutter about something to each other. Mario went around behind them. Of course, he could not read the Chinese characters, but there were pictures in the book too. One showed a princess sitting on an ivory throne. On a stand beside her was a cricket cage, just like Chester's. All of a sudden, the Chinese gentleman began to squeak in excitement. He was tapping the page with the stem of his pipe. "Here it is! Here it is!" Mr. Fong exclaimed to Mario. "This is the story of ancient China, head princess of ancient China, and she had a cricket for a pet and fed him mulberry leaves. It says, just as silkworms who eat of mulberry trees spin beautiful silk, so does a cricket who eats leaves spin beautiful songs. Then We've got to find some mulberry trees, said Mario. The only one he knew of right offhand was at the Botanical Gardens in Brooklyn, and that had a big fence around it. Well, I have a tree, said Mr. Fong, and his face curled up in a smile as wide as a pumpkin. Right outside my window. He went to the window and pulled up the shade, and in the courtyard outside the mulberry tree was growing. One of its branches almost stuck into the kitchen. Cy pulled off about a dozen leaves and put one into the cricket cage, but Chester did not touch it. Mario was dismayed. He doesn't like it, he said. Oh, no, he likes it, said Mr. Fong. He's just full of Chinese dinner for now. And that was exactly the truth. Any other time, Chester would have been gobbling that leaf up, but he was stuffed now. Just to show that the leaves were what he really wanted, however, he managed to take one bite. You see, said Mr. Fong, he'll eat the leaf when he's hungry. Chester was feeling so contented that he had to sing for a while. Everyone listened very quietly. The only other sound was the creaking of the rocking chair, which went very well with the cricket's song. Cy Fong and his friend were very touched by the concert. They sat with their eyes closed and the expression of complete peace on their face. When it was over, the old Chinese gentleman blew his nose on his silk handkerchief and took out of his sleeve. His eyes were quite moist, and dabbing at them with the handkerchief, he whispered something to his friend Cy Fong. He says it is like being in the palace garden to hear the crickets sing, Cy Fong translated for Mario. The boy thanked Cy Fong for the Chinese dinner, but said he would have to be going now because it was getting late. You come back any time, said Mr. Fong as he put 11 mulberry leaves in a little box and gave it to Mario. Plenty of leaves on the tree. I will save for the cricket. Mario thanked him again, and the old Chinese gentleman stood up and bowed. Mario bowed to him. Sai Fong bowed, and Mario bowed to him too. In the cage, Chester was bowing to everyone. Mario backed toward the door, still bowing, and went out. It had been a very nice evening. He felt very formal and polite with all of the bowing, and he was glad that his cricket had been able to make the two Chinese gentlemen so happy. There is a picture, just one picture, of the two Chinese gentlemen and Mario. See if you can see that. They're bowing to each other. They're dressed in their formal robes. Well, Mario found out that mulberry leaves are what he should be feeding Chester. So we'll have to see how that works out. Well, until next time, I'm going to say bye for now. Take care.